Well, good morning YouTube. It's 6:35 in the morning. Just another 5 minutes. Today I want to talk about reusable content. The days are long past where customers are going to come to your website and download a 50-page white paper and spend time sort of reviewing it. You need to be able to get your message across in a very crisp and clear way and in a very short space of time. Attention spans are getting less and less, and every time I speak to somebody it used to be, you need to produce a 5-minute video, and then it was a 3-minute video, and then it was a 1-minute video, and then it was 30 seconds. So as people's attention spans come down, when you're producing what I would call long-form content, think about how it can be reused. If you're going to produce a video presentation, think about, okay, can this be cut up into smaller chunks? Can there be ways that I can reuse parts of this content to give myself a lot of different ways of getting my message out to my customers? So one example of this is when we do webinars. So regularly through the course of the year I may do 6 to 10 webinars. Each of the webinars lasts about 30 minutes, and it usually comprises me sitting in front of a camera. So the way we used to do it was I would sit in front of the computer with a good quality microphone, something like this, and basically speak into the microphone. And the people on the other end of the webinar would hear me, they would see my slides, and I would be able to present to them. But just lately we've taken a new tack with this. We've looked at, okay, well, how can we reuse that webinar content? So what we do is we set up a green screen, just like they have in the Hollywood movies. I mean, you've all seen the pictures of how things like the Star Wars films were made, where there's no real sets anymore. It's just a green screen and everybody stands in front of it and they add the scenery later on. Well, when I'm giving the webinars, what I do is I stand in front of a green screen and I still present with a microphone, usually this time a little lavalier mic that sort of clips onto my shirt, and I present the presentation that I'm giving to the webinar. But at the same time, I'm recording this on the camera. Now, all that's being recorded is me standing in front of the green screen. So I'm presenting and I'm being animated and I'm waving my arms around in front of a green screen. Now, this allows us to reuse this content later. And I'll give you an example of this. So we've uploaded a copy of one of our recent webinars up in the link up in the top corner there. Just to give you an example. So this was a webinar that was delivered live, but I'm also stood in front of the green screen, and then once we've got the scene with me on the screen, we've added a background digitally, we've added a floating television screen, and we've taken the slide content and placed the slide content into that screen. This produces a piece of content that we can put on YouTube. But the content can also be cut up into smaller pieces. Our webinar consists of multiple pieces. So if you take each piece in a row and you make a list of all of the constituent parts of your presentation, you can then start to piece those together. So let's take our webinar. The first one we've got is, who am I? This is where you tell the audience who you are and who you represent. Okay, the second part. The second part is, what am I talking about? And this is where you give an overview of your presentation, the points that you're going to be making, and generally sort of wrap up the entire subject into 1 or 2 sentences. Okay, part 3. Part 3 is what I like to call the preamble. And in any webinar, there's always going to be people who join late. There are going to be people who haven't downloaded the plugin, who haven't prepared, so they need a few extra minutes. So if you plan to start at 10 AM, give them 5 minutes. Start at 10:05 and use that extra 5 minutes of preamble to talk a little bit about not just this webinar, maybe upcoming webinars, what you can do if you find this interesting, where you can find more information, and basically give the audience some content that's not part of your main presentation. Okay, number 4. Now this is where we break our main presentation down into three parts. Now the reason I say break things down into three parts is, so in any presentation I only give the audience three things to think about. And those three things can easily be broken down into three constituent parts. So these become three individual topics. As you begin to build your presentation, keep this in mind. Build your presentation in such a way that there are three very distinct sections. And this will allow you to break these down later. And if you might find that actually putting them in a different order makes a bit more sense. So it gives you the ability to move things around to make sure that your presentation is absolutely the best presentation you can give. Number 5. Number 5 is the Q&A. And the Q&A, there are two types of Q&A. There is what I would call the live Q&A, where people will submit questions during the presentation and you maybe pick 2 or 3 of those to answer. There is also the prepared Q&A, and these are questions that you want to ask and have answered during your presentation. And this maybe is a way of stimulating thought, it's a way of reinforcing some of the messages within your presentation, but make sure that you keep those short because the audience will want to have their questions answered. And then finally, when we get to the end, part 6 is the wrap up and a teaser. And the teaser really is, if you're presenting a series of webinars, it's to get people to come to the next webinar, but the teaser also must include a call to action. What are you going to do now? Now that the webinar is over, now that I've given you all of this information, what are you going to do now? So, those are our 6 parts. Now, the nice thing about this method is that when you start to think about reusable content, you can start to lay these out. And you can say, well, maybe what we want is we want the who am I and who do I represent, and we want part 1. This could form the basis of a short YouTube video. So maybe the who am I and who do I represent and just part 1 of your presentation. And then maybe you add the wrap up on the end there. So maybe you've now got a piece of content that you can then publish onto your YouTube channel, onto your company Facebook, you can promote it via Twitter. But just as easily, you could take the same who am I with section 2, and you've now got a completely different piece of content. And the same again, section 3, and you can start to see where this is going. So maybe you can have sections 2 and 3, and then your wrap up. What started as a 30-minute presentation has now become multiple shorter pieces of content. Now it could just be that you say, okay, well I'm going to leave the who am I off, I'm going to have these plus the Q&A. So again, it's up to you how you cut the presentation up. If you keep your presentation in clear, distinct sections, it makes it much easier to move the parts about. One thing to be careful of is not referencing a previous section in another section. Try and keep the sections very distinct and self-contained. You can imagine a situation where you said, in an earlier slide I said this, and the audience is sitting there thinking, I haven't seen that slide, he didn't say that at all. And that's because you cut that piece of content out. So trying to keep everything in very distinct chunks and not reference each other, so that way you can move them all about. So to wrap up, keeping your content in small, usable chunks that allows you to build multiple pieces of content is a really great idea. And it's a way that you can get a lot more value from one single presentation, one single webinar, and you can go on to use that content over a period of time. I talked about some of the tools we use, the green screen. You know, these are not expensive. The green screen that we use, I think it costs £100 on Amazon, and it even came with a couple of lights. We use a standard off-the-shelf DSLR camera or a Sony video camera. Again, nothing special, nothing expensive, that allows you to create some great pieces of content.